Are games running and looking worse today than ever before? Well, many do seem to think so. I mean, if you just look at all of the videos about the bad performance of games today, there are so many videos with footage of games with MSI Afterburner in the corner showing a frame rate counter in the 40s like it's a smoking gun, showcasing how bad game devs are at optimizing their games today, or how disappointing graphics hardware is now. Now, I love zooming in on pixels and complaining as much as anyone else. I too love to complain on the internet, that's what it's for now. But all of these videos are based on a very faulty premise, and I'll use one video as an example. A video by a young lad going by the name Vex. In his video, everything runs bad now, it's too soon to be swearing, which has a hilarious thumbnail with 43 FPS juxtaposed against the word unplayable, specifically the part where he talks about the performance of the original Doom.
We all know the Doom franchise. It's always been known to run super well, super clean.
I love this statement because it's 100% wrong, but it's something that I've heard repeated so often in YouTube videos. So in the 90s, when I first played Doom as it came out on a fairly standard 486 and a fairly standard PC at the time, Doom struggled. And its target was only 35 frames per second, which is much less than the 43 that Vex finds so unplayable. And it didn't even always meet that target. Even in the best equipped 486 DX2 with a good VGA card, it would slow down in heavier scenes.
So how did an incredibly expensive PC play Doom? Well, looking at the full screen performance, it is faster than many other 3D games for sure, but performance is temperamental and very scene dependent, and the longest and most complex views found in episode 1 or 2 or 3 can even dip into the upper teens at worst. Doom was faster than the rest, but at full screen, even my competently benchmarking 486 DX266 is struggling by modern frame rate standards.
On the machine I had to turn the screen size down to make it more consistent at the time. Doom didn't run on everything back then, and if you want proof of that, try playing one of the console ports.
This port is awful. Super NES Doom does feature all 3 campaigns and incredible renditions of the iconic soundtrack, but looks and runs worse.
And Doom 2, even more demanding. It wasn't until the first Pentium processor that you could reliably run Doom at its intended speeds, but who could afford those when they were new? And when Doom 3 came out in 2004, it was even worse. Now, I can't remember exactly what computer and graphics card I had at the time, but in my defense, I had untreated ADHD, and my memory of my childhood is a foggy, smeary, upscaled, and temporarily anti-aliased haze, but it was some sort of mid-range Radeon on a fairly normal PC. So it would have been equivalent to average computers with a 4060 that Vex was using in his video, and I couldn't play Doom 3 without turning the settings down to the lowest of the low, shadows off, textures down, but even if I had a top tier graphics card and CPU of the era, I would still not be getting the perfect experience. It was an extremely demanding game, and it took a long time before the hardware caught up to it. But this idea that Doom has always been super performant comes from the saying, Doom runs on everything, which was misinterpreted by so many to mean that Doom has always run on everything, and that's not even close to true. The first Doom game I could play on high detail when it was released was Doom 2016, an utterly gorgeous game to this day, still looks amazing, and even at the time ran very well, and in that way it was a rare exception to the usual rule. So the advice for people like Vex and others who want to complain about graphics, and I don't blame you, is before you make a video talking about how new games all run bad now because of these new features like upscaling and Unreal Engine, watch some videos of older games running on period appropriate hardware, and you'll see that it's always been like that. It's not new, it's the same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Yes, even in days gone by, games were always being released that ran bad on the systems of their era. I would even go so far as to say that in the past it was worse, by a massive amount. It's just many of us didn't even really notice that they were running bad, or we just lived with it. We didn't expect it to run well. It just seemed like most people were more into what it looked like than how it ran, and maybe that's still true for some today. I'll tell you a story because I'm old and that's what we do. When I was at uni, in the mid-2000s, a man named Nikolai told me that the graphics of Halo 2 weren't that good because the Xbox could do much better, which is true, but he used Unreal Championship as an example of that much better. And what did that game look like? Now, unfortunately, because this is an interlaced signal from an Australian 50Hz unmodded Xbox, it's kind of useless doing a frame rate counter. The only thing to pay attention to is how inconsistent the frame rate is. And that's on this enclosed level, but in this level, this more open level, it's significantly worse. It's almost never hitting 25 for more than a few frames in a row, except occasionally when you turn around and suddenly it's going at the full 50 Hertz and it feels really smooth for just a moment until another player appears on the screen and then it feels bad again. Yeah, it runs friggin' awful. And so sure, it can be high sometimes, but most of the time it's not. It's all over the shop, it's unresponsive, it's inconsistent, there's not a moment where it's acceptable, and for an Unreal Tournament like Arena Shooter, this is what I would call unplayable. And yet people liked it and thought it was amazing. Halo 2 may not have been much of a looker, but it ran much more consistently than this. Back on the PC, I don't know a single person who could properly run Oblivion when it first came out. My partner, who was not my partner at the time, but is now, she could not run it at all, and first saw Oblivion running on my computer. It didn't run well on it, but we could at least get out of the sewers and see the distant terrain. It was like nothing we'd ever seen before, and our minds were blown, but it ran really bad on all but the most unattainably expensive computers, and even then, not perfect. And now, many have joked about having that experience all over again with the remaster. Except I can run the remaster way better than I could run Oblivion when it was released. So in every year of games, there were always a lot of games that just ran terrible on the typical hardware at the time. So even if you were lucky enough to have mid to high-end hardware, it would still run bad. It was true on consoles where they could target specific hardware and knew exactly what they would run on. And it was definitely true on PCs where they couldn't do that. I think we just lived with it and didn't complain too much. So after all of that, you might be surprised to hear that I don't believe Vex and the rest of the precocious youth are wrong to complain about it. If anything, we should have always been complaining about it the entire time because it sucked. And it does seem to be on a downward trend with the last 5 years at least. A trend where games are so much more demanding and hardware can't keep up. It's definitely feeling like we're going back to the worse old days. So I think we should complain because games and software in general shouldn't be made for future hardware that doesn't exist yet. They should be made for what exists now. And because they make games that only run now with settings turned way down, then what we get now with brand new and expensive hardware are extremely compromised experiences that give a very real impression that they are ugly and crap games because they may as well be. So Vex showed these games running on a 4060, which is admittedly a low-end card from the last generation, but that's still not cheap. That's not a cheap bit of hardware, and for its current price, I'd expect more from it when it came to the Monster Hunter game he showed in his video. So I ran the benchmark on my machine with my 3080 because I'm not going to buy the game, so I'm just going to use the free benchmark. And it gave me an average of 80 FPS, so that's much higher than his 40, but that's the average. The actual performance was very inconsistent. And on a 3080, I'd expect way more. I know what that card is capable of. So one could have argued in the past that making games more demanding pushed the hardware to improve to keep up and let us have experiences we couldn't have had before. But can we argue that now? The hardware that comes out still doesn't fully match the demands of current games, but are these experiences in these games pushing past limitations of older hardware to give us those experiences? Or are they just the same experiences with more detailed terrain and questionably better lighting? Could you argue that Doom the Dark Ages is a type of game we couldn't have had on last generation hardware? Or the Monster Hunter game? Could you argue that any of them are? Because you definitely struggle to make that case because it looks like everything we get now could be done on older hardware. You just need to have less polygons on the rocks. You could potentially argue that about a lot of the PS4 and Xbox One era of games. So I've been recently playing Days Gone, and when you face an entire horde of zombies, all individually running after you, clambering over things and each other, swiping at you while a bunch of them burn in the background and their bodies pile up, all of them behaving as both a swarm, but also behaving as individuals, that couldn't have run on a PS3, that needed the PS4 at least. There certainly is also an emotional aspect to the feeling like graphics tech is stagnating as well, because old folks like myself, we got to regularly experience something that these younglings can't always see. One of the most satisfying things about being a PC gamer and upgrading your hardware has always been going back to older games and putting them up to max settings and seeing what they should have looked like, but you often can't do that now because they just keep patching in new settings.
Holy shit.
So sure, I can run Cyberpunk on max base settings pretty easily now, but they patched in more ray tracing features and path tracing, so I don't get that emotional satisfaction of going back and seeing what a game looks like at its best. It's one of the best parts of PC gaming, and it's often just gone now. Because patches add new features for newer, or more accurately, future hardware. And this keeps happening to so many games. Grand Theft Auto 5 went from being easy to run to being a stress test. And CD Projekt Red didn't just do their Cyberpunk, they did The Witcher 3 as well, so they patched it so it pushes even my decrepit old 3080 to the absolute limits. So you load up a game thinking that now you've upgraded, you'll definitely be able to run it, and then you can't. Not without making some compromises, making it feel like it was just like it was on your old hardware when you had to choose compromises there too. But I think all of that wouldn't be such a big deal, if not for the next thing. The situation with global finances is, to use a technical term, totally fucked beyond any possible redemption. Graphics cards are expensive, more now than ever. They were always expensive, but it's worse now. So when I got a 1080 in 2016, it was adjusted for inflation about 1,500 Australian dollars in today's money. And when I got a 3080 in 2022, it was about 1,800. And the current edition version of that card, the 5080, the same brand, the cheapest Asus, is $2,100. So while the 6 to 7 year gap between the 1080 and the 3080 was $300 increase, adjusted for inflation, so was the 3 year gap between that and the 5080 of today. Also, $300 adjusted for inflation different. They've been getting so much higher in price and recently accelerating the rate that it does increase, even taking into account the value of money. And as bad as that might be, those numbers don't even tell the whole story, because that's on top of income not increasing much in that time for most people and the cost of everything, necessities included, going up rapidly too. Now I can only speak for Australia, because I'm Australian, but our grocery store trips are the second most expensive thing after housing. The money that's left over after bills and food and housing is smaller and smaller every year, which means that the price of computer hardware, even if they didn't increase somehow, would still take up an even bigger piece of the budget pie. So when every year the percent of income barely increases, but the cost of everything is significantly increased, the amount of money left over for a graphics card shrinks rapidly. It becomes an even bigger investment to get a GPU, even for the cheaper models. You're probably having to gather up some money for a few months, at least. For normal people who aren't tech channels on YouTube who somehow have every edition of graphics card ever made to test. So for normal people like myself, and yes, I'm normal, shut up, it's such a big financial commitment and you have equivalently big hopes and expectations for it, and there's no way that they could ever meet those expectations. Because it's the same as it ever was, but it costs so much more. So what would just have been a little bit disappointing is now crushing because the bigger price attached to it. So with that in mind, surely games should now be made with more appropriate hardware targets in mind to look good on the hardware that exists now, and definitely not the most expensive hardware, which is getting ridiculously expensive, and certainly not a hypothetical future hardware that seems to always be being targeted. Because right now, it's too expensive to be buying things that are stepping stones to something better.
And first I would say that we are in sort of a state of growth in terms of graphics technology, and this is a state of growth that we've been in many times before, such as when 3D was first introduced to the world. It was very rough early on, but it was a necessary, difficult step to get there.
Even if they were giving you a new experience, it's just too expensive for it. That all may have worked in the past, when you could get mid-range stuff at decent prices and when groceries weren't priced as luxuries. But now, not now, when mid-range prices are still highway robbery levels. So we can go back to trying to push graphics after the cost of living goes down, which it probably won't. So with a totally stuffed economy, why did I get the expensive high-end RTX 3080? Because even though it costs more, I think it's cheaper in the long term. Because if you get something higher end, you don't have to replace it as soon as if you got a cheaper one. It'll last longer. If I'd gotten a 1060 in 2016 instead of the 1080, I wouldn't have had it last me until 2022, and the time when I did have it, it would have been less good. It would have become e-waste so much sooner. I believe that in the end, if you get a cheaper graphics card, you spend more money on them over the long term, just like the Sam Vimes theory of socio-economic unfairness, where you buy cheap boots, you keep having to replace them, which cost more than if you buy better boots once and your feet are dry while you have them too. Though I do regret buying the RTX 3080 a bit, not because it doesn't perform well enough for me, but just purely because I didn't pay too much attention at the time to graphics hardware. I just simply bought the new model of the one I had, and now I regret it because it's clear Nvidia has a bit of a kind of monopoly in that market, and they alone get to choose the direction of it, and I would really like to have more competition in the GPU market just to help with pricing, and I didn't help that at all by buying the monopoly's product, but that's probably a different but related subject. Also, it's harder to get Nvidia cards working in Linux. And if you're at all concerned about the environment, it's even worse. So clearly the performance gains from new optimizations and new manufacturing techniques and new chip designs aren't enough now, as evidenced by the absolute high-end from Nvidia, who in perhaps a desperate attempt to get any of those high-end effects like path tracing to work at all, have put out super high-end graphics cards that cost almost 5,000 Australian dollars with power bills to match. 575 watt graphics cards compared to the usual 350 watts for that type of product. And that's still pretty high. So that must be what it takes for them to get the expected performance gains. Apparently they're more worried about path tracing virtual environments rather than the very real environment they're helping destroy. And even if you don't care about that, Nvidia releasing those carbon stomped video cards to the public changes the perception of the top end of what graphics are expected to be. We've all seen those YouTube videos by people who can somehow afford multiple of those cards, putting two in the same machine, or seeing a Digital Foundry video where they use one of those top-of-the-line $5,000 video cards to draw something that they then zoom in on while using double the wattage and twice the price or more to do it. And it looks the same as everything else, but we're expected to be impressed. And in the end, seeing that all the time makes it all seem so mundane. Which makes me more than a little mad, because we're ruining the environment to have ray-traced global illumination. Really? Cannot watch Digital Foundry talk about modern games anymore, or any tech channel now I think about it. I haven't even watched a tech link for at least 6 months. Sorry Riley, you beautiful man. Not even you can make me want to listen to any sort of tech news now. Digital Foundry do have a video with their own answer to the question of if modern graphics are disappointing, and I thought it was alright. Though I didn't agree when one of them, Alex Battaglia, said the videos about it were grifts. Yeah, I'm sure many of them are. Many videos are made to capitalize on the belief, sure. But the belief that game graphics are getting worse is very real, and that's why so many of those videos exist. So I can understand somewhat some negativity towards Digital Foundry of late. I mean, I've got some, but sometimes it's a bit excessive. This guy in particular is very against Digital Foundry to the point of making a video telling you to unsubscribe. Now, if Alex Battaglia was talking about this channel when he was talking about grifts, I'd absolutely have to agree with him. Look, I'm not a graphics programmer, I'm just the smouldering remains of a tech enthusiast. But the way he talks, the way all his videos are just stepping through an Unreal Engine rendering timeline while claiming he can do better, this is the kind of videos made by people who aren't experts but want to appear to be one. And look at his thumbnails! These all look like the covers of Angel DVDs. Either way, I won't stand for any slander against DFRetro, not in this house. I still watch all of those. They were particularly useful for me because they have footage of Doom running on real 486DX2 that I could use to demonstrate how it ran on real hardware at the start of this video. So shout out to Alex for that video. It's clear that people aren't happy with what they're getting now. But that's the trend with all tech now, isn't it? Whether it's Microsoft forcing their co-pilot on the unwilling, that's all of us. Every single one of us. While charging more for their much worse products and relying on us being trapped with them, or streaming platforms charging more while also putting ads back in, phones and TVs which come with pre-installed software you can't remove even if you don't want it, that just bloats the systems. And software in general coming with things you can't switch off or can't customize that bloat the systems that you don't want. Tech in general is like this, disappointing, with companies telling you that you want what they give you and not giving you a choice in it. And if you don't like the new direction of a particular technology, you're dumb and old and a Luddite and get with the times, old man. We're often told with this new technology, ray tracing and upscaling, that it will make games easier to develop. So game devs don't have to have crunch time and worry about the work of baking in lighting or other more time-consuming to develop techniques. We're told that real-time lighting will mean game devs won't have as many problems with unreasonable deadlines and can be treated better while still releasing good products.
It also facilitates easier development for things like lighting artists and building these environments.
And that could work in an optimistic world where CEOs of game companies use that tech to free up their devs and keep the same amount of them and pay them the same, which I would be all for, rather than CEOs believing that this means that game devs can do more with less and fire a bunch of them to make even more profit instead. Which of those two scenarios do you think more likely? That game's being escaped doesn't work as well when the format itself becomes commentary on all of this. But maybe the real main cause of the dissatisfaction lately, just look at the men who talk about this subject, and yes, always men who all look to be in their 20s at the latest. And what would have been a formative time for them, which set their expectations for game graphics? Perhaps the middle of the 2010s, the year 2016 would have been a significant year for them, an early experience likely in their teenage years, and what a year that was, the year of the GeForce GTX 10 series, such as the legendary 1080 that I had, what I would consider the greatest graphics generation of all time, of the entire history of graphics cards, and I know I'm not alone in thinking that.
Back in 2017, I owned a $600 PC, and I played PUBG, Skyrim, Assassin's Creed, and Borderlands on it all the time. But nowadays, it's hard to run any modern title on a PC under $1,500.
That only leaves one option. Oh man, come on. Everyone says that graphics card is the best. I know it's basic, but the 1080 or the 1080 Ti, they've got to be the best graphics cards ever made. That is such a basic answer, but I can't argue with you. It was so good for the price, man. Makes you remember a time when you didn't have to go broke to be able to afford a graphics card. Yeah, the good old days.
I've never experienced a big of a leap in raw performance in a single generation of graphics hardware before the 10 series, and I haven't since. So those young men have an early memory of a graphics generation making everything undeniably better. Better image quality, frame rates, everything. And they've never had anything close to that since. So their expectations were made to be super high. And they could never be satisfied with the average that came after. Such a good card, that 1080. I used it for 6 years. I finished Cyberpunk on it. Admittedly on lower settings, but it was undeniably Cyberpunk. And it was before they patched it, so it ran a little bit better. So it was still super impressive even in the time. But when it was new, and even for a couple years afterwards, I could play games at 4K resolutions, no upscaling. It was never like that before, and it's never been like that since. So early in these men's gaming lives, they got to experience that. Of course they're going to be disappointed now. Nothing will ever top that. Nothing could ever top that. But for older people like myself, and like the old men of Digital Foundry, our formative years were earlier. So we didn't see the 1080 as the expectation, that was the exception. We saw the before times where games always ran crap on the hardware they came out in, so we didn't have that expectation. But I did have that expectation when I was younger, so I still remember opening a brand new 3DFX Voodoo 3, top of the line 3000 version AGP model, shiny and new in its green box, with the intense eyes of the Voodoo man on the cover staring back at me, way back when that was new. And as soon as I slid it comfortably into the AGP slot in what I believe was a Pentium 3, everything was so much better than anything I'd ever seen before. It was a great card. And it made me think, this is what it's going to be like now. This is the speeds I can expect from now on. This is how it's going to be. But within a year or two, it wasn't able to keep up. Deus Ex, in the year after, or maybe the year after, I don't know, couldn't run very well at all. GTA 3, the year after, was even worse. At least now, my 3080 can still run most of what's coming out 3 years after its release, even if it needs upscaling. The Voodoo 3 just could simply not run things. So in conclusion, I'm sorry boys. I know you don't want to hear what I'm about to say, but you gotta hear it, and you have to listen, because it's important. Though I should probably look a little bit more relatable, so you will listen, and I might have to sit backwards in a chair to tell you this, to get really real with you. Hey guys, it's me, Youth Pastor Peter here, getting real with you for a second. Guys, you're all just gonna have to play all those fucking Steam games you bought on sale over the years that you've barely touched, which would run perfectly on even mid-range and even low-end parts now, instead of buying all these new games you'll just be disappointed by, that you can't run well, that'll just piss you off. At this point, buying a new game that runs on Unreal Engine is just going to upset you. You're just not going to enjoy it. You're going to see a blurry image and froth at the mouth, so don't spend money on it. Save your money. Play a game that you haven't got around to yet, or some indie game that costs bugger all, that even if it's not great, it was stuff all money, so you'll get over it. Or buy some remaster of an older game that'll definitely run just literally anything else at this point. Those of us who do notice performance and image quality are all just going to have to live on 5-plus-year-old games. Well, the ones that haven't been patched with new features. Or indie games, well, the ones that not running on Unreal Engine, which are also rather demanding. But besides those, I guarantee you there's a bunch of games on your list that you've been meaning to play but never got around to it. But I mean, it's not like you're going to be able to play any of the new games on your system well, so hey, why not take this opportunity, dig into your backlog of games in Steam, or GOG, or even some dusty old console, and finally play them. That will free us all up from talking endlessly about how bad the graphics are now, which is a negative topic that's definitely impacting us psychologically. So we should instead discuss more positive things in this same space, like who is best boy of Digital Foundry? My pick is John Linneman. I will fight you on this. Meet me on Tumblr. We are starting a fandom fight.